Hello and welcome to the Intentional Brief, your weekly video update on the one big thing in cybersecurity news for middle market companies, their investors, and management teams. I'm your host, Shay Colson, managing partner at Intentional Cybersecurity, and you can find us online at intentionalcyber.com. Today is Monday, April 13th, 2026, and for those who may run into the show in the archive, the war in Iran saw failed negotiations over the weekend, and the U.S. is now imposing a blockade of all ships attempting to transit the Strait of Hormuz. But despite the fact that we've covered the war week over week here, that's not the bit we're going to be carrying forward. Instead, we're going to be talking Mythos, Glasswing, and the potential for an AI-driven cybersecurity paradigm shift. Let's jump right in. We talked last week with Anthropic's other news in the context of their data leak, but this week we're talking about their product launch, namely a new model called Mythos, which was launched in preview only to a very select number of customers, 40 or so, give or take, if you believe the press release about Project Glasswing. Why such a small group? Well, Anthropic claims that this new model is so powerful at finding and exploiting cybersecurity bugs that it can't be released to the public, and they want large players in the space to have a chance to go through and patch their systems before it is introduced into the wild. They claim it found exploitable and exploited successfully vulnerabilities in every major operating system, and so it could be really that good. Anthropic claims they've manually verified some of the findings and that 98% of them, of the sample set, which was, again, not all of the thousands of findings, but the 198 they did verify were over 90% accurate in terms of exploitability and severity. And I think Anthropic is also pretty clear on this, that these are fully automated exploits that are actually being carried out by the model itself. They say, by fully automated, we, quote, mean that no human was involved in either the discovery or exploitation of this vulnerability after the initial request to find the bug, unquote. So really, you throw it a prompt, it does the rest, which I think is why they're recognizing some of the potential power for impact in a negative way of this. I think the more skeptical folks in my network read the timing of this announcement as just a touch too convenient in relationship to last week's little oopsie, and that it's just PR to cover for their leak. But I think there's actually something real here, and so do many of the leaders at these organizations. In fact, Bloomberg reports that last week, Treasury Secretary and Federal Reserve Chair here in the U.S. summoned leaders from the Wall Street banks and tech companies to an in-person meeting in D.C. to talk about just how serious this was and emphasize the need to be proactive about it. We also saw a release about Project Glasswing, which is separate from the Mythos preview model, but related in terms of announcing a partnership between Anthropic and the largest tech players in the world, backed by both $100 million in usage credit, read tokens, and $4 million in direct donations to open source organizations like those that maintain Linux distributions and other things. And by the largest tech companies, we are not messing around in terms of players. We're talking Amazon, Apple, Broadcom, Cisco, CrowdStrike, Google, Microsoft, NVIDIA, Palo Alto, and more, including some financial institutions like JP Morgan Chase. So they're really taking this seriously and hoping that these companies can operationalize this. Anthropic also has a good list of suggestions for defenders, which they shared in their post. And I think I'm going to play a few of those forward to you today, because these are good advice. These are pieces of good advice that are useful today and that will be useful in an accelerated discovery world that their Mythos model seems to portend. They have a few that I think work well for us. One is use generally available frontier models to strengthen defenses. I think this is good advice in general. If you're not making the most of the tools available to you today, do that now, get those things in place, and don't get distracted by the shiny thing that might someday impact your system when you know there's things impacting your system today. The next one they offer is, quote, think beyond vulnerability finding, unquote. So again, how do you triage bug reports? How do you patch them? How do you support the engineers and operations teams behind them? What are the implications for, say, legacy systems or your cloud infrastructure? Those are things you can focus on now. They also suggest you shorten your patch cycles. Good advice, of course, generally, but if you know that new vulnerabilities are coming, you need to be ready to meet the pace of that discovery. So shortening those cycles and building those workflows now is going to help you be ready to respond when Mythos does eventually reach public consumption, which it will, because it's inevitable that these technologies will get out. Their fourth piece of advice that I would play forward to you is automate your technical incident response pipeline. Again, this one is easier said than done, but if you're going to need to match the pace of the Mythos model in terms of discovery, you're also going to need to match that pace in terms of response. Automation is really your only hope to run at that pace, so start accelerating those workflows now. I would also say at the very end of their blog post, Anthropic includes a hard truth reminding us that, quote, ultimately, it's about to become very difficult for the security community, unquote. And maybe that's true. And maybe it will also, though, raise the awareness of these issues and some salience as to why they matter, help us accelerate the ability to patch the vulnerabilities that we find. And maybe it will work to introduce fewer vulnerabilities into the code we push out moving forward. I would say there's just as much opportunity for a silver lining as there is for a thundercloud. Not to be outdone, OpenAI has, of course, launched its own Trusted Access for Cyber pilot program and is reportedly working on some security-specific models, but details remain sparse. I think in the end, the truth about all of these bugs, vulnerabilities, and findings is that they were already present in our systems. It's only that we're just now finding out about them. The fact that they were discovered by Anthropic and put in a blog post doesn't mean that others weren't already aware of them. The goal here is, of course, to patch them and not reintroduce bugs like them moving forward. So I think if we try and take that silver lining and hope that those tools that help us find these things can help us fix and ultimately prevent them in the future, and that's positive progress. From a fundraising perspective, following up on last week's nearly $40 billion week, we saw another strong showing with nearly $27 billion in newly committed capital, led by Blackstone raising $10 billion for a fifth opportunistic credit fund, and ArcLight, a Boston-based energy and infrastructure PE firm who raised $3.9 billion for their eighth fund. At this rate, we're headed towards about $100 billion month in terms of April, and the mechanics of all of this still boggle my mind. There are lots of bets being placed, and it's still not clear to me which ones are going to pay off. So that's why I will stay focused on building resilient organizations for our clients who then can stay in the game and try and have those bets pay off. A reminder, you can find all the links to the articles we talked about in the comment section below, back issues and written transcripts of these videos at intentionalcyber.com, and we will see you next week for another edition of the Intentional Brief.